A retired soldier and his K9 were walking through a frozen forest. Just another morning, until the dog stopped, growled, and ran. In the snow they found her, a 5-year-old girl in a ripped pink dress, barefoot and crying, searching for help. Her mother? Unconscious. The cold? Deadly. What happened next didn't just save a child. It changed them all. This story might break your heart, but it may also restore your faith in second chances. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe no child should be forgotten and no loyal dog ignored, subscribe, because what you're about to hear might change how you see the world. Montana in early December was a place carved from stillness and storm. The snow didn't fall so much as it arrived, thick and heavy, a curtain drawn across the wilderness. On the outskirts of Willow Creek, a small town already halfway buried in white, the wind swept through the pine-covered hills like something ancient and unsatisfied. Most people had retreated indoors long before sunset, locking their doors, layering their children in wool and fleece, and surrendering to the rhythms of winter. But 2 miles beyond the last porch light, where power lines turned to tree roots and roads vanished into memory, stood a lonely cabin pressed deep into the forest. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't meant to be. Just 4 walls, a sloping roof, and the soft orange glow of a single firelight dancing behind fogged windows. Inside, Jack Miller sipped lukewarm coffee from a dented metal mug. He stood at the window with the slow, deliberate stillness of a man who has spent years teaching himself how not to react. Tall and lean, Jack had the build of someone who once ran fast and fought hard, but now moved with the restraint of experience. His face was defined, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a scar curving from his right eye to his jawline like a whisper from a long-forgotten war. At 40, he looked older than his years, though not because time had been cruel, just honest. Jack had been first sergeant in the U.S. Army K9 unit deployed 3 times to the kinds of places that never made postcards. The last tour in Kandahar had changed everything. A roadside blast, a failed extraction, teammates gone. What came home wasn't just a soldier, but a man made hollow by survival. He lived here now, in this place, without noise, without visitors, without memory. No TV, no phone, just a wood stove, a rifle, a shortwave radio crackling with forecasts and loneliness, and a dog, Rex, Belgian Malinois, 9 years old, former military working dog, sleek coat the color of dark wheat and shadow, intelligent eyes like burnished copper, muscles still taut beneath age-softened fur. Rex had once been a legend in their unit, precision-trained, fearless, able to detect explosives under pressure no man could withstand. And now, like his handler, he was retired, living out his days with the only soul who truly understood him. That evening, the wind howled across the roof like it was trying to get in. The stove crackled, throwing heat into the main room as the cabin groaned softly under the pressure of snow. Jack sat at the table polishing the receiver of his rifle, the ritual as comforting as prayer. Rex lay on the rug nearby, breathing slow and steady, his ears occasionally flicking at some distant, imagined sound. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow piled against the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a tree creaked and snapped. Then Rex lifted his head. Jack noticed it instantly. The change in posture, the stillness before the signal. Rex didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood, body alert, tail straight, ears forward. his eyes locked on the window. "What is it?" Jack asked, already pushing his chair back. Rex stepped toward the door and gave a low, guttural growl. Jack rose, set the rifle aside, grabbed his coat from the hook, and opened the door. The cold hit him like a shove. Wind and snow rushed into the cabin, swirling in eddies at his feet. Rex bolted onto the porch, sniffing the air with quick, precise turns of the head, then darted down the steps and into the dark. Jack followed, pulling the coat tight. The beam of his flashlight cut across the snow like a blade, revealing only falling flakes and white ground. But Rex was ahead now, moving in tight arcs through the trees, nose to the ground, tail rigid. Jack recognized the pattern. Tracking. "Slow down," he muttered, though he knew the dog wouldn't listen. They moved quickly through the trees, past the clearing where Jack chopped firewood, deeper into the woods toward the old ranger trail. Jack's boots crunched in the snow, his breath visible in hard bursts. Rex paused at the edge of a shallow slope and let out a sound somewhere between a whine and a growl. Jack reached him, knelt down, and saw it. A footprint, bare, small, child-sized. Jack stared at it. The shape was delicate, toes curled slightly inward from the cold. No tread, no socks, no boots, just a bare foot pressed into the snow. Not one, several, leading into the woods, fading fast beneath the steady fall of snow. Jack's breath caught. He glanced at Rex, who looked back at him with something close to urgency. "This can't be right," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Rex darted ahead again, following the trail before it disappeared completely. The wind picked up, moaning through the trees like a voice too far to hear. Jack turned in place, scanning the darkness, the snow reflecting his flashlight back at him like a mirror of fog. The prints were vanishing. Already the wind had erased half of them. In minutes, the snow would cover everything. No trail, no path, just forest. Something inside Jack stirred, a feeling he hadn't let surface in years. Not fear, not duty, something deeper, memory. Ghosts in sand and bone. He'd carried bleeding men across deserts, shouted coordinates under gunfire, pulled Rex from a burning convoy once with his bare hands. But this was different. This was fragile, small, alone. "We'll come back with gear," he said, his voice more to himself than to Rex. "Lights, rope, pack the sled." Rex gave one final glance into the woods, then turned back, following Jack toward the cabin, every step pressed deep into snow that kept falling faster. Inside, Jack grabbed the emergency bag he hadn't touched in years. Thermal blankets, first aid, flares, spare batteries. He paused beside the door, listening to the wind howl like it was trying to scream something into his ears. He looked at Rex, whose eyes hadn't left the trees. "Someone's out there," Jack whispered, "and they're running out of time." As he closed the cabin door behind him, the storm swallowed their footprints. The storm had softened by morning, but the cold had grown sharper, seeping through the thickest coats, clinging to skin like something alive. Jack stood at the edge of the woods, his breath misting in short, measured clouds. Rex was already several yards ahead, but moving with purpose, his head low, ears forward. They'd been out for less than 15 minutes, but Rex was locked in, tracking. Jack recognized the gait, the way Rex's muscles shifted like a spring half-tensed. He'd seen this before in Afghanistan, watching the dog pick up scents the human eye couldn't see. And here, in the snow-covered forests of Montana, Rex was once again a soldier on a mission. The footprints were nearly gone. Overnight snowfall had erased most of them, But just beneath a thin crust of ice, Jack spotted faint depressions. They were small, barefoot, and barely spaced. A child's, no more than 5 or 6 years old. The path was erratic, weaving through trees, doubling back at times like someone wandering in confusion or fear. Jack crouched and touched the edge of one print, noting the sharp angle, the slight drag. Whoever left these tracks had been struggling. They moved farther down a shallow incline where the trees opened into a glade blanketed with undisturbed snow. The sun, pale and filtered through a layer of gray sky, cast a faint glow over the scene. Rex paused again, body frozen, nose to the air. Then he veered slightly right, toward the base of a large spruce. There she was. Curled at the base of the tree, her small body hunched into itself, was a little girl. Her blonde hair clung to her cheeks in wet strands, and her pink dress, light, thin, far too light, for a day like this, was crumpled and damp. She wasn't wearing a coat. Her legs were bare, her arms wrapped around her knees in a desperate attempt at warmth. Jack's heart caught in his throat. He moved toward her cautiously, kneeling into the snow beside her. Her lips were pale, her cheeks flushed with the red bloom of cold. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even shivering anymore. "Hey," Jack said gently, voice low and steady. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Her eyes fluttered open, just barely. They were blue, clouded but alive. She tried to speak, but the words came out as a broken whisper. "Mommy?" Jack leaned closer. "Where is she? Where's your mom?" The girl's head tilted slightly, her gaze drifting toward a cluster of trees in the distance. She tried to lift her arm, but it dropped again, too weak. Jack didn't wait. He slipped off his coat and wrapped it around her tiny body, lifting her carefully into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. A feather. A ghost. His jaw tightened as he looked at Rex, who was already moving ahead, nose to the ground once more. They followed the direction the girl had indicated, cutting through the trees until the outline of an old structure emerged from the snow-draped woods. It was a cabin. Small, crooked, half-buried, one of the old ranger posts that hadn't been used in years. The door was slightly ajar, hanging on a rusted hinge. Inside, the air was still and bitter. Cold seeped from the floorboards, and frost lined the window glass. The room was dim, lit only by what little daylight filtered through the cracks in the wood. Jack stepped over a fallen chair and spotted a figure slumped against the far wall. It was a woman. She was tall and slender, with auburn hair that had come loose from a ponytail and now framed her face in tangled waves. Her features were delicate, strong jawline, soft cheeks that had lost their color, and a pair of long lashes resting against pale skin. She looked to be in her early 30s. Her eyes were closed. Her body leaned heavily to one side, propped awkwardly against a pile of old firewood. Jack moved closer, kneeling beside her. She was alive, breathing, though slow and shallow. Her right leg was stretched out in front of her, angled in a way that looked wrong, as if she had fallen hard. Someone, maybe herself, had tried to brace it with a piece of broken wood and strips of fabric. The makeshift splint was loose, but it had held. Jack could see the tension still in her hands, like she had fought to stay awake long after her body had begun to fail. He laid the little girl down gently beside her, covering both with a thermal blanket from his pack. The girl curled instinctively toward the woman's side, her small fingers seeking contact. The woman didn't stir. Jack scanned the room. There were empty food wrappers near the corner, a cracked plastic jug with frozen water at the bottom, a torn grocery bag with a juice box and a small pink stuffed bear. That was all. Rex stood by the doorway, alert but calm. His breath fogged in the cold, his eyes shifting between Jack and the forest beyond. Jack exhaled slowly. They had been out here for at least a day, maybe longer. The girl had likely wandered away after the mother passed out, desperate for help or warmth. Either way, they wouldn't survive another night in this place. Jack pulled out a thermal pad and laid it beneath the two figures, then got to work converting a broken door into a makeshift sled. It was slow work, rope from his pack, padding from old coats, careful arrangements to avoid jostling the woman's leg. He worked silently, methodically, every movement practiced, like he was back in the field under fire. Once he had them secured, he stepped outside. The wind was starting to rise again. The sky overhead threatened more snow. But Jack didn't look up. He looked down at the girl, who now slept, face pressed against her mother's arm. The woman remained unconscious, but her breathing was steady. Jack turned to Rex. "Let's bring them home." The snow had picked up again by the time Jack secured the last strap of the sled. Thick flakes drifted sideways in gusts of wind that howled like something feral, cutting through the forest like teeth. Jack stood over the sled for a moment, checking the knots and the padding. The girl, Emily, he now knew, lay nestled beside her unconscious mother beneath a thick blanket, her breathing shallow but more even than before. Sarah hadn't stirred. Her leg, still braced with a makeshift splint, remained motionless. Jack adjusted the wool scarf around his neck and pulled the hood tighter over his head. The cold was relentless, and every breath left frost on his beard. His hands, though covered by thick gloves, felt stiff. The forest ahead looked endless. Just more snow, more wind, and trees bent under the weight of winter. But he knew the way. A straight trek west for about 2 miles, then a northward curve through the gully that would bring them to his cabin. Normally it was a 30-minute hike, with the sled, the weight, and the storm pushing back at every step. It could be twice that. Or worse. Rex stood ready beside the sled. His ears twitched, eyes scanning. Snow collected on the dark fur across his back and shoulders, but he didn't seem to notice. At 9 years old, Rex was still a soldier in every fiber, silent, watchful, unshakable. But Jack saw the way his paws pressed carefully into the snow, as if calculating every move. Rex had a limp once, 2 years ago, a ligament strain from a canyon fall, and though recovered, cold weather made it flare up again. Jack noted it, but said nothing. They both knew the stakes. Jack gripped the rope and gave it a short tug to test resistance. It moved, heavy but steady. "Let's go," he said quietly, and began the walk. The first stretch was flat, following the same trail they'd taken from his cabin the previous night. The wind blew against them, pushing into their faces, stinging eyes and skin. Jack lowered his head, narrowed his gaze, and focused on each step. Behind him the sled creaked faintly but glided over the crusted snow. Rex moved slightly ahead, navigating the terrain, pausing when needed, adjusting course when drifts grew too deep. Every 15 minutes or so, Jack stopped to check the passengers. Emily had curled tightly against Sarah's side, her face hidden beneath the blanket. Sarah remained unconscious, her brow pinched slightly as if caught in a dream she couldn't escape. Jack checked her temperature with a touch to her forehead. Still cold, but not worsening. He whispered softly, "Hang in there," though he wasn't sure if it was for her or for himself. About halfway into the journey, the terrain shifted. The forest dipped into a shallow ravine, where snow collected in deeper pockets. The wind changed direction, funneling down the slopes like a river of cold. Jack felt it cut through the seams of his coat. He gritted his teeth and pressed forward. The sled resisted. More here. He adjusted his grip on the rope, leaned into the slope, and dug his boots in. That's when he heard it. A faint, distant sound. Metallic, sharp, and unmistakably unnatural. Jack froze. Rex stopped too, ears standing straight, head cocked. The sound came again, farther ahead. A hollow clang, like metal slapping against wood. Jack scanned the trees. A few seconds later, a man emerged from the white blur. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a neon-orange parka and ski goggles. A snow shovel was strapped to his back, and he dragged a sled of his own. This one smaller, carrying wood and tools. His name was Nathan, one of the forest rangers assigned to the northern sector. Jack had seen him twice before, once at a supply run in town, and once when Nathan had checked in on a fire report. He was in his late 40s, with a thick gray beard and sun-cracked skin that spoke of years working outdoors. Gruff but fair. Nathan had a voice like gravel and a habit of chewing gum even in sub-zero weather. Jack raised a hand. "Nathan!" The ranger stopped, blinked against the snow, and pulled his goggles up. "Jack! Hell, I thought you were a coyote out here." Jack motioned to the sled behind him. "Found them this morning, girl and her mother, cabin off the ridge. Looked like they'd been there all night." Nathan moved closer, crouching to inspect the figures. He exhaled slowly. "Damn, you weren't kidding." His voice softened. "The kid looks frozen." "She's holding on," Jack said. "The mom's got a leg injury. I'm taking them back to the cabin. They won't survive out here." Nathan nodded. "Storm's not getting better. Another front's pushing in tonight. You're doing the right thing. You got radio?" Nathan patted his chest. "Yeah, but signal's weak this far east. I'll head to the ridge and try to call the main office. Get a medic ready." Jack gave a tight nod. "Appreciate it." Nathan hesitated. "Need help pulling." "I'll manage," Jack said, though his shoulders burned. Nathan slapped him on the back. "Knew you'd say that. Good luck, brother. I'll check in if I pass your place." Jack watched him disappear into the trees, then turned back to the rope. The last half-mile was the worst. The storm thickened again, flurries swirling like a living wall. Jack's breath came ragged, each step slower. His hands felt numb despite the gloves. The sled dragged more than it slid. Rex moved with quiet urgency, his paws sinking into snow, now softening from below. When they finally reached the edge of Jack's clearing, the sky was already dimming toward dusk. The cabin stood like a lifeline, smoke rising from the chimney, a welcome sight in a colorless world. Jack pulled the sled up the steps with a final grunt of effort. Inside, warmth rushed to greet them. Wood stove glowing, fire crackling. Jack carried Emily to the cot near the stove, wrapped her in another blanket, and placed a warm compress over her feet. Then he moved to Sarah. Gently he removed her outer layers and checked her leg again. It was swollen but no longer exposed to the cold. She stirred faintly, first movement in hours. Rex lay beside the door, still alert, though his head now rested between his paws. Jack poured water into a kettle and set it on the stove. Then he sat at the table, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the toll of having carried someone else's life in the snow and made it out alive. By late afternoon, the warmth inside Jack's cabin had settled into a quiet cocoon of safety. Outside, the snowstorm continued to whip across the hills like a white tide, burying the forest deeper in silence. Inside, the fireplace crackled with steady rhythm, its orange glow painting soft shadows across the wooden walls. Emily slept, curled up near the heat, her small hands clutching the stuffed bear Jack had found in her mother's bag. Her breathing had evened out, and her skin, though still pale, had started regaining hints of color. Jack had added another layer of blankets, keeping her close to the stove where the warmth was strongest. Sarah remained unconscious on the cot in the corner. Jack had carefully elevated her leg, now supported by a proper brace he fashioned using a split rail and some spare fabric. The injury didn't look life-threatening anymore, but it was clearly painful. Her expression twitched occasionally, brows furrowing as if battling unseen dreams. Jack had wiped the dirt from her face earlier, revealing the woman beneath the fatigue. She was striking in a quiet, weathered way, slender, tall, with a kind of cheekbones that spoke of both elegance and endurance. Her skin was pale but freckled lightly across her nose. Her auburn hair, now dry, hung loosely over one shoulder, and when she breathed, her lips parted with the faintest sighs. Jack wondered what kind of life had brought her to this part of the world, driving through snow with a little girl and no apparent support system. He crouched near her and checked her pulse again. Still there, steady, stronger than before. He let out a slow breath, then rose and turned to the kettle hissing over the stove. He poured some hot water into a chipped mug and mixed in powdered broth, the closest thing he had to soup. Behind him, Rex remained stationed near the door, body still, eyes fixed on the window. Jack glanced over. "You're not warming up." Rex didn't move, but his ears twitched slightly. He was alert, more so than usual. That bothered Jack. The dog wasn't agitated, but he was watchful, listening, sniffing. Jack stepped to the window and wiped the condensation from the glass. Outside was a blur of white. He could barely see the edge of the tree line. Snow continued to fall heavily, but something felt off, like the quiet wasn't real anymore. He turned back to Rex. The dog now stood fully upright, his hackles just slightly raised. Then came the sound. Faint at first, barely audible over the storm, a long, distant howl. Not a lone cry, not one coyote echoing into the canyon. This was a pack. Jack stiffened. His hand moved instinctively to the Remington rifle propped against the wall near the door. He didn't grab it yet, just rested his fingers on the stock, feeling the familiarity of it. He moved quietly toward Rex and crouched beside him. "You smell something?" Rex gave a short, controlled breath through his nose. His tail was low, stiff. His posture was neither aggressive nor relaxed, just ready. Another howl, this time closer. Jack stood and crossed to the front door. He opened it slowly, letting the icy wind rush into the room in a single freezing gust. The world outside was white and dark, shifting with movement and shadows. He stepped onto the porch. The sky was starting to bruise into evening, and the stormlight had turned to that eerie blue-gray hue between day and night. Somewhere out there, less than half a mile away, a wolf pack was moving. Rex joined him silently, standing tall beside his left leg. Jack scanned the tree line. No shapes yet, no eyes reflecting. But he knew how they moved, stealthy, efficient, hungry. Wolves were opportunists. They'd follow a scent for miles, test boundaries, wait for weakness. And right now, inside the cabin, they'd smell injury. Blood, heat, fear, a mother and child unable to run. Jack stepped back inside and shut the door. He checked the lock and dropped the wooden bar into place. The windows were old, but solid, the walls thick. Still, it wasn't a fortress. He moved quickly. He added more logs to the fire, blocked the small back window with a blanket, checked the flare gun near the emergency kit, loaded 4 rounds into the rifle and leaned it within reach. Rex lay by the door again, but didn't close his eyes. An hour passed. Sarah stirred. Her voice came out dry and broken. "Emily!" Jack turned from the stove, surprised. He grabbed the mug of broth and stepped beside her. "She's here," he said gently. "She's safe, right there." Sarah blinked slowly, her eyes focusing. They were hazel, bright even in the dim light. She looked toward the small form near the fire, then back at Jack. Her brow furrowed. "Who are you?" "Jack Miller. I found your daughter near the ridge this morning. She led me to you." Sarah tried to sit up but winced. Her leg shifted slightly and her face contorted in pain. "Don't move," Jack said firmly. "You've got a bad leg. Could be fractured. I've splinted it for now, but you'll need a doctor." She sank back into the pillow, her breaths shallow. "How long?" "Few hours. You've been out cold." Sarah looked down, then slowly took in the room. "This your place?" Jack nodded. She gave a weak chuckle. "Didn't think I'd wake up in a lumberjack movie." Jack smirked. More like ex-military survivalist. Less plaid, more paranoia. She smiled faintly, then grew serious. "Thank you. For Emily. I didn't know if she'd make it." "You kept her warm," Jack said. "Long enough for help to find her." A silence passed. Then Sarah asked, "Where are we?" "Montana. About 10 miles outside Willow Creek." Her eyes closed for a moment. "We were trying to get to Spokane. My car slid off the road. I couldn't move my leg. She got out looking for help." Jack didn't press for more. Not yet. He handed her the broth. "Drink slowly." She nodded and sipped. Her hands trembled slightly. Jack moved back to the window. Outside, the wind had shifted again. This time from the north. Another howl. Closer now. Jack gripped the rifle. The wind howled louder as darkness swallowed the forest. Outside the cabin was just another shadow, buried in the whiteness of Montana's winter. Inside, the fire crackled low, flames licking the last few dry logs Jack had stacked earlier. He sat cross-legged on the floor, back resting against the cabin wall, a loaded rifle cradled across his lap. His eyes, sharp and restless, flicked between the fireplace and the door, between memory and the now. Rex lay stretched across the threshold, his body unmoving but alert. His coat, a dense mix of black and copper, shone in the dim firelight, his ears flicking at every crack of ice beyond the wood. At 7 years old, he was still muscular and fast, but there was a weathered wisdom in the way he moved now. A long scar traced the side of his right flank, a remnant from the last tour. Jack had never asked the dog to be brave, but Rex always was. Sarah slept uneasily, her leg propped on folded blankets. The painkillers had helped, but her face remained tense, even in sleep. Her auburn hair clung to her damp temples, and her breath came in shallow waves. Emily, still curled near the hearth, whimpered in a dream, but didn't wake. The girl had clutched her stuffed bear so tightly, the fur had worn bare in one spot. Jack had noticed earlier. Tiny hands, frost-bitten knuckles, fingernails with dirt beneath them. She was fragile, but something in her spirit had kept her alive through the storm. That same something now gave Jack a reason to sit here, guarding strangers as if they were his own. Outside, another howl, closer this time, then silence. Jack's fingers gripped the rifle a little tighter. His mind began to drift, unwillingly, into memory. It was Kandahar, 5 years ago, a rooftop at dawn, the dust in his mouth, the smell of diesel and blood, the screams, sharp, unfinished, and Rex charging into gunfire to drag back a wounded private. Jack had covered him with suppressive fire, yelling over the radio for evac, heart pounding so loud he barely heard the bullets. They survived, but 4 others didn't. Since then, the silence before an attack had always been the worst. And now in the cold hush between howls, that silence returned. Jack blinked and shook it off. He leaned forward, added 2 more logs to the fire, and scanned the window. The storm had softened, snowflakes drifting now instead of slicing. But the darkness felt thicker. He stood, checked the back window, then returned to Rex. "You hear them?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Rex didn't move, but his golden eyes flicked toward the trees. Then he did something rare. He growled, low, soft, almost like a warning meant only for Jack. That was all it took. Jack snapped into motion. He extinguished the lantern near the fireplace to limit visibility from outside, grabbed the flare gun and tucked it into his coat. Then he walked over to Sarah and gently nudged her awake. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them. "What? Don't panic," Jack said, voice steady. "But there's a wolf pack nearby. I don't know if they'll come closer, but I need you to be ready, just in case." Sarah blinked, trying to sit up but wincing. "Emily? She's okay. Still asleep." Jack moved to the girl and wrapped her in another blanket, gently placing her closer to her mother. He handed Sarah a flashlight and a folding knife. Not much, but enough to help her feel she could protect her daughter if needed. Then he turned back to Rex. "Show me," he said. Rex rose soundlessly and padded to the front door. Jack opened it slowly, rifle ready, and stepped onto the porch behind the dog. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that carried weight. Then came movement, just a flicker, among the trees. Rex stiffened. Jack raised the rifle, breath held. A dark shape emerged, low, fast, then another, silhouettes against snow. But the wolves didn't charge. They stayed just within the tree line, watching. Jack narrowed his eyes. 4 of them, maybe 5. Their eyes reflected the cabin light like tiny moons. Then suddenly, one of them stepped forward. It was larger than the others, its fur mottled gray and black. Its eyes locked with Rex's. They stood like that, dog and wolf, neither flinching. Then the wolf gave a low chuff, almost a growl, and took another step. Rex responded with a snarl, hackles raised. He stepped off the porch. Jack whispered, "No, stay." But Rex didn't listen. The canine moved down the snowy steps, slow and deliberate. Jack's heart pounded, unsure whether to fire, call him back, or trust him. Rex didn't look back. The lead wolf growled. Another behind it yipped sharply. Then the unexpected happened. The wolf backed off. It didn't flee, didn't run, just stepped away, then turned, vanishing into the dark like smoke. The others followed. Rex stood alone in the snow, his breath visible in slow puffs. Then he turned and walked back toward the cabin, tail high, posture calm. Jack opened the door and let him in, eyes wide with disbelief. "You negotiated?" Rex said nothing, of course, just curled up by the door, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Inside, Sarah stared from her place on the cot. What happened? Jack didn't know how to explain it. They left. Sarah was quiet for a long beat. Then softly, "That dog. He's not just trained. He's something else." Jack nodded. "He always was." That night none of them slept much. Jack remained near the door, rifle across his lap. Rex didn't move once, ears alert the entire night. Sarah dozed in and out. Emily whimpered once, but didn't wake. Outside the snow fell quietly, and the wolves never returned. The gray light of morning seeped into the cracks of the old cabin, thin and cold, like the air that followed it. Snow had stopped some time before dawn, but the world outside was still locked in a silent, frozen grip. Inside, the fire had burned down to glowing coals, barely warming the cramped space. Jack stirred first, having barely slept. His back ached from the hours spent upright with his rifle, his mind sore from the weight of watching. He looked to Sarah. Her breathing was steady, if still shallow. Her hair was spread like a rust-colored halo on the rolled blanket beneath her head. Her leg elevated with what little supplies they had. Emily had migrated closer to her mother during the night, one small hand resting protectively on Sarah's shoulder, even in sleep. But it was Rex who drew Jack's attention next. The dog was lying by the door as before, but something was wrong. His right shoulder was matted with darkened fur, stiff with dried blood. Jack's breath caught. He crossed the room quickly, crouched beside him, and ran his hand gently along Rex's side. Rex winced. Not a sound, but a tightening of muscle. A flinch. The injury had gone unnoticed in the chaos of the night. The confrontation with the wolves, the standoff in the snow. But now, in the stillness of morning, it spoke loud and clear. Jack examined it more closely. A deep gash beneath the fur, likely a tear from claws or teeth. Not life-threatening, but serious. The bleeding had slowed, but the cold masked the danger of infection. He sighed and pressed his forehead to Rex's for a brief moment. "You didn't tell me," he murmured. "You just stood there. You held the line." Rex's tail thumped once, weakly, as if acknowledging the words. Jack rose, jaw clenched. The time for staying still was over. Whatever doubts or death wishes had lingered in his heart before. Whatever ghosts he had carried into these woods, they had no place here now. The child had changed that. The mother, the dog. This wasn't a mission anymore. It was something deeper. A reckoning, maybe. A second chance. "We're getting out of here," he said aloud. Sarah stirred. Her voice, still hoarse, broke the silence. "How?" Jack turned to her, offered a half-smile. "You ever ridden a makeshift sled?" She blinked, still groggy. "What?" He pointed to the stack of firewood near the far wall. "We're going to build a stretcher. I'll drag you out. Rex and I, mostly me." Sarah looked doubtful. "Jack, you'll freeze. I've done worse," he replied. "And Rex needs a vet. You need a hospital. Emily needs to sleep in a warm bed and eat something that doesn't come out of a tin." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. "You're not the man I met 2 days ago." Jack didn't answer. He just went to work. He used broken legs from the cabin's table, lashed them together with belts and torn strips of Sarah's extra sweater. The bottom was layered with old coats and blankets, crude but functional, a flat sled wide enough for her to lie on with Emily bundled beside her. While he worked, Emily woke. Her small voice broke the quiet. "Is Rex okay?" Jack looked up from tying a knot. "He'll be okay. Just needs some help. Same as your mum." Emily nodded solemnly. "I'll help too." She took it upon herself to find more cloth, holding bits of fabric with her mittens and offering them proudly, even if they weren't useful. Jack let her help. It mattered. 2 hours later, they were ready. Jack pulled Sarah carefully onto the sled. She winced, but didn't complain. Emily climbed in beside her, burrowing under a blanket. Rex stood beside them, tail low, but ready. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked softly. Jack met her gaze. "I've never been more sure." Then he took the rope, looped it around his torso, and leaned forward. The snow was deep, the path ahead uncertain, but he moved. Slowly, steadily, he dragged the sled across the forest floor, following the trail Rex had scouted the day before. His boots crunched in the ice. Every step was a war against gravity and fatigue, but he welcomed it. Pain was something he understood. Pain meant progress. Rex walked ahead, limping slightly but determined. He kept his head low, ears rotating at every sound. Jack watched him, drew strength from him. Hours passed. The sky remained an unforgiving gray. They passed fallen trees, half-buried rocks, and the occasional distant shape of a watching deer. Once they heard a branch crack behind them, but it was just the forest shifting under the weight of fresh snow. Jack never stopped. When his legs burned, he pushed harder. When he fell to one knee, he got back up. He muttered under his breath sometimes, old military mantras, fragments of prayer, even curses. Anything to keep moving. By late afternoon, the trees thinned. In the distance, a shadow of a ranger station peeked through the snow-covered pines. A low structure with a red roof and antennae poking skyward like fingers. Civilization? Safety? Sarah saw it first. "Is that—" "Yes," Jack breathed. "Almost there." They made it just before sundown. Jack stumbled into the ranger station, half delirious, calling for help. A young park ranger named Tom, a freckled, broad-shouldered man in his 20s, responded. He rushed outside with a med kit and radio, eyes widening at the sight. "What happened?" "Car crash, snowstorm, found them in the forest. Dogs wounded, too," Jack gasped. Tom nodded. "All business now. We'll get a snowmobile. EMTs are on standby in town." Jack nodded, then sank to the porch, exhausted. He didn't remember falling asleep. Only Rex's warm fur against his leg. Only the sound of sirens in the distance. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and sharp winter wind, carried in on jackets and boots. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, white and unwavering, bouncing off the pale blue walls of Willow Creek's only hospital. A place small enough that everyone knew the nurse by name, but sturdy enough to handle a crisis. The moment the rescue snowmobile had reached town, a team had been waiting. One paramedic, a trauma nurse, and a veterinarian with a salt-and-pepper ponytail, and hands that moved like clockwork. Rex lay on a padded stretcher in the animal care unit, a white blanket draped over him. The gash along his side had been cleaned and stitched, an IV line feeding into his foreleg. He didn't move much, but his chest rose and fell in slow, steady rhythm. Beside him, on a chair far too small for his size, sat Emily. Her pink dress was now paired with an oversized flannel shirt someone had handed her at the station, and her blonde curls were pulled into two uneven ponytails. Her cheeks were flushed, her small boots scuffed with dried blood and mud. But she was unshakable. She held Rex's paw tightly in both hands, whispering soft nonsense to him. Stories about bears that lived in teacups, songs without melodies, words too big for her voice. Sarah lay in a room down the hall. Her leg had been properly set, and the X-rays had confirmed no permanent damage. She was resting, though the exhaustion ran deeper than bone. Jack had stopped by earlier, standing awkwardly at the foot of her bed like a man who didn't know whether to say goodbye or stay. Sarah had simply taken his hand, squeezed it gently, and whispered, "Thank you," before drifting back into sleep. Jack now stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall near the vending machine. He looked out of place in the clean, warm corridor, still in his thick coat, his beard frosted with the last remnants of their journey, eyes shadowed with fatigue. His shoulders were broad but slightly slumped, as if carrying more than weight. Something quieter, the echo of memory. He watched through the small observation window as Emily rested her head on Rex's side. A voice interrupted him. "She's been there for hours." Jack turned. The speaker was Dr. Karen Howley, the vet, late 50s, practical to the core, with sharp hazel eyes and streaks of gray in her tightly pulled hair. Her voice was calm, but had the kind of authority that made you listen. "She won't leave him," Jack said. Dr. Howley nodded. "He's lucky. So is she." Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "How bad?" "The wound was deep, but clean. He's strong. Smart, too. Dogs like him, they don't panic, don't make it worse. He held steady the whole procedure." She looked Jack in the eye. "He's going to make it." Something shifted in Jack's face. Not relief, exactly. Something softer, more elusive. The tightness in his jaw lessened. His breath deepened. "Thank you," he said. Karen studied him. "You trained him? Raised him? He was my partner overseas. 9 years. That explains it." She folded her arms. "You've both got the same eyes, watchful, like you've seen too much." Jack didn't respond. Karen let the silence settle. Then gently, "You should go rest. We'll call you if there's any change." Jack looked through the window again. Emily had fallen asleep, curled next to Rex like a cub with its guardian. Rex's paw still rested in hers. He smiled, small, involuntary, a real one, his first in a long time. "Yeah," he murmured. "Maybe I'll stay a bit longer." 2 days later, they returned to the cabin. The ranger station had offered temporary housing, but Sarah had declined. She and Emily were not in a rush to go anywhere, and Jack's cabin, once a fortress of isolation, had become something else, familiar, safe. Jack had stocked up on food and firewood during the day they were at the hospital. Emily had been ecstatic to see the cabin again. She rushed to the fireplace, pointing to where she had first woken up, then darted to Rex's dog bed and declared it the best spot in the whole world. Rex, now stitched and bandaged but walking again, accepted this with the dignity of a war hero tolerating celebrity. Sarah limped slowly inside, leaning on a crutch. Her eyes scanned the room as if seeing it for the first time. She moved with caution, not because of her leg, but because of what this place now represented, a crossroad. Jack met her gaze as he carried a kettle to the stove. "I didn't think I'd have guests so soon," he said. Sarah smiled faintly. "I didn't think I'd be crashing a cabin in the woods." "You're not crashing, you're invited." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that official?" Jack paused. "I guess it is now." Outside, the snow had finally stopped. The forest was still, the sky above pale blue with streaks of sun breaking through the gray. The door to Jack's cabin stood open. letting in the fresh winter air, and Jack didn't rush to close it. Inside, the kettle whistled. Sarah settled near the fire. Emily curled up beside Rex, her small fingers tracing patterns on his side. Jack poured 3 mugs of cocoa, handed them around, then sat on the porch steps, looking out. The cabin was no longer a refuge from the world. It was the start of a new one. 1 week later, the snow still blanketed the Montana wilderness like a woolen quilt, soft and deep, covering the bruises of the land. The sky was finally clear, icy blue and wide, with the occasional trail of clouds drifting like forgotten words. Sunlight glinted off the snow-covered treetops and cast long golden shadows across the open yard outside Jack's cabin. In the middle of it, a little girl in a thick red coat and polka-dot mittens stood triumphantly beside a lopsided snow bear. Emily's cheeks were pink, her breath puffing in clouds as she packed snow into another round ball. A knitted hat sat slightly crooked on her head, and her blonde curls peeked from beneath it, messy and free. She turned to her companion. "Rex, guard the snow bear," she declared, pointing with all the authority her 5-year-old self could muster. Rex, his side still shaved where the stitches were healing, sat a few feet away with regal patience. He watched her closely, tail sweeping the snow in slow, approving movements. His energy hadn't fully returned, but he managed to play short bursts of chase, and every now and then, when Emily wasn't watching, he'd lean into the snow bear and knock it slightly, just enough to make her squeal with outrage. On the porch, Jack sat in the same old wooden chair, now patched with a new blanket thrown over the back. His coat was unzipped, face clean-shaven for the first time in weeks, and his sharp jawline had returned. The hollowness in his eyes, so familiar, so permanent, had softened. He held a mug of black coffee in both hands, steaming in the chill air. He watched them, Emily and Rex, as if seeing a memory forming in real time. Sarah stepped out from inside, limping slightly but no longer needing the crutch. She wore jeans and a long wool sweater, her auburn hair in a loose braid over her shoulder. Her face was rested, her skin warmer, freckles more visible in the winter light. She leaned against the porch railing and looked toward the yard. "She's built an entire army of snow animals," she said with a tired laugh. Jack smirked. "At this rate, we'll have to start charging admission." Sarah looked at him, then sat beside him. "You doing okay?" Jack took a sip of his coffee. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to." They sat in silence for a moment, the sound of Emily's giggles filling the air. "I haven't seen her laugh like this in years," Sarah said. "Even before the accident. It's like something opened up inside her here." Jack looked down at the steam swirling above his coffee. "She opened something up in me, too." Sarah turned slightly. "You ever going to tell me what happened before all this?" Jack exhaled, long and slow. "Maybe. Someday." Sarah didn't press. She just nodded and watched the girl build another lumpy snow creature. "I was broken," Jack said quietly. "After the war, after losing my unit, after Rex almost died in my arms. I came out here because I wanted silence. I didn't want to be needed. I didn't want to matter." Sarah didn't speak. "But then," he continued, "a little girl in a pink dress walked into my world and told my dog her mother was dying in the woods, and everything changed." Rex barked once, a low, playful sound. Jack smiled. "I'm not whole yet," he said, "but I'm starting to believe maybe I don't need to be." Sarah reached out and placed her hand over his. "You're enough, Jack. You always were. You just didn't know it." He looked at her. Really looked. There was no pity in her eyes, only clarity. Strength met by strength. Inside, the wood stove crackled faintly. The porch creaked as a breeze passed through, and Emily squealed again as Rex accidentally knocked over her latest snow fox. "Rex!" she yelled. "That was my best one." The dog turned slowly and sat, head high, as if proclaiming innocence. Jack laughed, low and real. Later that afternoon, after cocoa and warm soup, Emily tugged at Jack's sleeve. "Can I draw something on the big wall?" Jack raised a brow. "Which wall?" "The one near the kitchen. It's boring." Sarah looked at him with mock warning. "You do realize giving her creative freedom is a dangerous game." Jack knelt beside Emily. "You can draw one thing." "Okay." She bounced away, and within minutes came back with crayons and her tongue poking out in concentration. When Jack walked by an hour later, there was a large, wobbly drawing of a cabin. 3 stick figures stood in front of it, a big one with a beard, a lady with long hair, and a little girl with giant eyes, and beside them a dog, big, bold, front and center. She'd written beneath it, "Our home." Me, Mommy, Jack, and Rex. Jack didn't say anything. He just stared at it. Later that night, after Emily fell asleep and Sarah was reading quietly on the couch, Jack stood at the door, staring out at the snow. He whispered softly, "Welcome home." Rex stood beside him, silent sentinel, eyes on the stars. The scars were still there, on his body, in his mind. But now they weren't just marks of pain. They were reminders of survival, of connection, of love that crept in quietly and refused to leave. For the first time in years, Jack didn't dread tomorrow. He waited for it. Maybe God doesn't always send miracles with trumpets or thunder. Maybe sometimes he sends them quietly, in the form of a broken man who no longer believes he matters, a loyal dog who never left his side, and a child in a pink dress who teaches them both how to hope again. Jack didn't go into the woods to find redemption. But sometimes when we are lost, grace finds us anyway. And perhaps that's what this story is, a whisper from heaven reminding us that no soul is too far gone, no heart too frozen to feel warmth again. In the darkest nights, love still finds a way, through snow, through silence, through scars. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone you care about. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Your words might just be the light someone else needs today. And if you believe in second chances, in the quiet kindness of strangers, in the way God works through even the smallest acts of love, subscribe to this channel. Let's keep sharing stories that heal. May God bless you and those you love, and may He walk beside you, especially when the path is cold and the world feels quiet. Because miracles are real. Sometimes they wear fur. Sometimes they hold your hand.